Thank you, Tamar, and welcome to session 3. Now we come to that watershed moment in history where Eastern Europe meets Western Europe with the arrival into Greece of tens of thousands of Sephardi Jews, which actually began shortly after the anti-Jewish incidents in Spain in 1391. More followed on their heels in 1415, and then again after the Jews' expulsion from Spain in 1492. The arrival of this large, overwhelming number of Jews dramatically changes the character of the Jewish communities in Greece. The Romaniot spoke of their newly arrived brethren as Megorashim, a Hebrew term for those expelled ones. The Spanish Jews would eventually outnumber the local Romaniot. The Sephardim would form the majority of Jews in Macedonia, in Thrace, in Crete, and the Aegean Islands, while the Romaniot became more concentrated in southern and western Greece. Unlike the Romaniot Jews, the Spanish Jews were arriving by choice and were allowed to settle with considerable autonomy. Most of them were skilled in professions that made them formidable competitors. All of them spoke either Spanish or Portuguese and had little inclination to learn Greek. Note that the Jews who came from Spain were coming not with one language. They spoke different languages: Portuguese, Catalan, Aragonese, and Castilian. All of these languages throughout the 16th century merges into a single one, Ladino. And then most of the Romaniot, especially in Salonika, also switched to Ladino. Crete actually remains the main stronghold of Romaniot identity, never to be fully submerged by the Sephardim. And of course, Epirus too, with its capital, Ioannina, remained a Romaniot center until the 20th century. By the beginning of the 17th century, there were only small enclaves of Romaniot Jews still speaking Judeo-Greek. So Ladino becomes the language of the Ottoman Empire. And before we concentrate on the Sephardim today, I wanted to share with you one of my favorite Romaniot sites, the Jewish cemetery of Khalis from this period. Their unique gravestones dated before the 14th until the 19th centuries. Here, Romaniot Jews were unlike the successful and wealthy Sephardi Jews in Thrace and Macedonia. They worked in simple trades, earning meager livings as merchants and craftsmen. And what one sees today in the Jewish cemetery of Khalis is really fascinating. A collection of identical gravestones. They are all made of stone, have a distinctive shape and special characteristics. They are unique in Greece as well as the rest of Europe. All the graves also face the same way, as you can see, southeast towards Jerusalem. They have a garbled superstructure that is slanted with an opening, as you can see at the head, to permit the insertion of a commemoration stone to tell us who is buried there. And the arrangements of the graves was strictly linear due to a pressing lack of space, which is evident across the whole entire expanse of the cemetery. The graves are so densely packed and so densely spaced that some of them appear as if they are touching others. And there are, still today, a few hundred of them to be seen. Some scholars believe that there is a Kabbalistic meaning and reasoning behind their design and shape, and that the Talmudists and Kabbalists of the Khalis community chose to give this ancient shape to their graves. Its front forms this seven-sided shape that some scholars believe could be directly connected to the 10 sefirot of the tree of life. Although you'll see 11 attributes here, note that 2 of them, Keter Vedat and knowledge and crown, are seen as this unconscious and conscious manifestations of the same principle. It really is a wonderful moment to go to the Khalis Jewish cemetery and to connect with these Jews' modest and humble decision to choose a uniform design for their burial stones, a unique experience in Jewish cemeteries. So now let's return to the Ottomans. It is impossible for us in the 21st century to grasp even faintly the impact of the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed's conquest of the great city of Constantinople. Constantinople was heir to ancient Rome, to the sophisticated urban civilization of Greece. It was also New Rome, a reflection of the heavenly Jerusalem of which Christians considered themselves citizens. For many, the fall of Constantinople was a sign of the beginning of the end of the world. There was an atmosphere of bewilderment and despair. And as a consequence of these recent and dramatic changes, the Greek-speaking Jews found themselves in an empire that very quickly expanded further into the East and North Africa, and in doing so, Sultan Mehmed absorbed the Jewish communities into various cities that had lived for centuries within the tolerant atmosphere of Islam. Perhaps the most important consequence of these great changes was the type of stability it gave to Jewish lives and fortunes in Greece. The Jews were generally treated well under the Ottomans. The Ottoman conquest of the 14th and 15th centuries changed and retained the status of Jews in the region. On the one hand, Jews remained second-class citizens compared to Muslims and had to pay the tax assessed to all Muslims, called the jizya. On the other hand, they were now equals of Christians, the same as Christians, who were still the majority of the population. The Sephardim brought with them a higher level of culture and general achievement than that of the Romaniot Jews. This certainly enhanced their self-image as well as the attitude of the Ottomans towards them. Our next stop is going to be the incredible story of the false messiah Sabbatai Zevi and the powerful influence that he had on the Jewish world. We will enjoy a micro-historical study of this case and watch with amazement how Greek Jews really wanted to believe that Sabbatai Zevi had come to initiate the Messianic age. Towards the end of our lecture, we will look particularly at how Salonica responded to Sabbatai. The 20,000 Sephardim and Spanish Jews and conversos who settled in the city of Salonika after 1492 completely changed the city's demographic and economic rebirth. Historically, it was the largest Jewish community in southeastern Europe and was the only city in the Ottoman Empire in which Jews were the majority. Some knew foreign languages which helped them conduct commerce with Europe, while others were skilled craftsmen who introduced many new arts and crafts, including the manufacturing of arms and gunpowder, textile, and other things. These Jews were active in international trade, finance, medicine, and pharmacy. They contributed to the city's development and international character. With the Jews' help, the city of Salonika turned into the second most important port city in the Ottoman Empire after the capital, Constantinople. So we are beginning to sense the golden age of Salonika in the 16th century. 31 independent synagogues or congregations with names that reflected the geographical origin of the newcomers: Provincia, Majorca, Castilla, Catalan, Aragon, Evora, Italia, Sicilia. There are also Jewish libraries, an important Talmudic academy, a printing press established in 1503, and a conservatory for Jewish religious singing, piyutim. The Salonical rabbinic establishment was known for its innovation, a response to the wide range of peculiar halachic problems created by the expulsion. Sephardi forced converts to Christianity were accepted back into the fold. So this is an exciting place to be. And one of our newcomers is Sabbatai Zevi. And I thought then it's really meaningful for us to really think about this moment in history and how it's going to affect our Greek Jews. I want us to understand who Sabbatai Zevi was, what the Greek, particularly the Salonican Jews, thought of him, and why a large group of them decided to continue supporting him after his conversion to Islam. Finally, we will discuss how the Sabbatai movement continued to have an influence, particularly in Salonika, down to the 20th century. So who was Sabbatai Zevi? Well, Sabbatai Zevi was born in 1626 to a Jewish family in Izmir, modern Smyrna, Turkey's principal port on the Aegean. The family had lived in Greece, we are not sure where, until his father, Mordechai Zevi, moved to Smyrna, which was also developing into a major center of Levantine trade. The name Zevi is unknown among Sephardim, either as a personal or a family name, and it is likely that both the name and the family were of Ashkenazi origin. Sabbatai's parents died before he became famous. But at the age of 18, he was ordained as a chacham, a wise man, a Torah scholar. But he never served as a rabbi, nor is there any mention of his ever doing anything for a living. What we do know is that he begins to study Kabbalah, mysticism. And for a considerable time, his language remained that of the Zohar, whose symbols always remained more alive to him than the new symbolism of the Luranic Kabbalah of Sfat. And we should point out at this stage that Sabbatai was without literary ambition and perhaps also without literary talent. There is not one book that he has written, no treatise, not even a responsum or Talmudic novelle. And judging from his later development, he was probably never capable of a sustained and a reorganized creative intellectual effort. In his late teens, Sabbatai's elder brother became very wealthy. And Sabbatai seems to have relied on this brother and enjoyed material independence at any rate. At the age of 20, Sabbatai marries his first wife. He did not consummate his marriage, preferring to divorce her a few months later. Soon afterwards, he marries another woman of highly respected family of Smyrna, but repeated his behavior, does not have sex with his wife, and divorces her as well. The name of these two divorced wives are still not known. Yet at the age of 22 in 1648, he holds his first public appearance and conducts strange actions, which ends in some sort of scandal, greatly incensing the rabbis and providing a fair amount of gossip. For another 2 years, he continues in Smyrna, studying Kabbalah without hindrance. But between 1651 and 1654, he is banished from the city, and in the next few years, we lose track of where he went exactly and when. Scholars sense that he traveled across Greece to Salonika, to Thebes, to Athens, and then goes to Constantinople. In his first visit to Salonika, Sabbatai Zevi acquires the reputation of an inspired man among his fellow citizens, and before long, a number of young scholars of his age are gathering around him. Sabbatian tradition preserves many details of his stay in Salonika. He and the other young scholars who studied with him both Talmudic and mystical law. There are reports that they took ritual baths in the sea with him and accompanied him to the fields ordered outside the city, where they devoted themselves to the mysteries of the Torah. And when I was in Salonika and I looked at this bath of the Jews, I wondered whether he had entered this with his students. Sabbatai clearly possessed something important for a potential Messiah: panache and real personal charm. And this is attested by all witnesses. There was an air of nobility about his dealings with people and a very winning kindness. He had a gift for music and he loved singing. He would often sing to himself, and whenever he chanced upon a Spanish love song whose tune caught his fancy, he would convert it into a mystical song of divine love. During Sabbatai's first residence in Salonika, we know that he prayed in the synagogue called Kahal Shalom and lived in the house of Joseph Florentine. He made a number of friends among other young scholarly rabbis. Some information on his life can be culled from Christian sources. Christian writers were fascinated by Sabbatai Zevi, especially after his fall in 1666, because here you have a false Messiah of the Jews. For example, the memoirs of Edward de la Croix, who was secretary to the French ambassador in Constantinople. He noted that in Salonika, Sabbatai had invited the leading rabbis to a banquet at which he married himself to a Torah scroll, shocking them so profoundly that they banished him now from Salonika. The rabbis who banished him were headed by Rabbi Chia Abraham Diboton. Sabbatai Zevi then travels through Greece, visiting Athens and the Peloponnese. Well, what about Athens? How do the Jews greet him there? We think he was there in 1650 and visited the 15 to 20 Jewish households that at that time were located on the Acropolis, spending some time with the Jewish community. Note, at this time, the Acropolis was the fortified citadel of Athens, and it was quite normal for Jews under the Ottomans to be living there. He probably then stopped at a number of towns along the road, particularly those with large Jewish communities, such as Larissa and Thebes. He moved then to Constantinople and then to Jerusalem. Eventually, he settles in Cairo, where he lived for about 2 years, between 1660 and 1662. In 1663, Sabbatai moved back to Jerusalem, where he resumes his former ascetic practice of frequent fasting and other penances. By this time, his reputation had grown, and many saw this as proof of his extraordinary piety. He also prayed and cried at the graves of pious men and women, or distributed sweetmeats to children on the street. Gradually, as you can imagine, he gathers a larger and larger circle of adherents. At the time, the Jerusalem Jewish community was in dire need of money to pay the heavy taxes levied by the Ottoman government. Known as the favorite of the rich and powerful Raphael Yosef Halabi in Cairo, Sabbatai was chosen to travel back to Cairo and appeal to him for money and support. And his success in getting the funds to pay off the Turks raised Sabbatai's prestige even further. Another event that took place during his second stay in Cairo helped spread Sabbatai's fame in the Jewish world. Because during the Chmielewski massacres in Poland, a young Jewish orphan named Sarah was found by Christians and sent to a convent to be cared for. After about 10 years, aged about 16, she escaped, or so she claimed, through a miracle, and made her way to Amsterdam and then to Livorno, where, according to reports, she led the life of prostitution, while also conceiving the notion that she would become the bride of the Messiah, whose appearance was thought to be imminent. When a report of her adventures in Livorno reached Cairo, Sabbatai claimed that such a consort had been promised to him in a dream because he, as the Messiah, was bound to fall in love with an unchaste woman. He reportedly sends messages to Livorno to bring Sarah to him, and they are married in Chalabi's house. The overturning of her past life was interpreted by Sabbatai Zevi's followers as further confirmation of his messiahship, following the biblical story of the prophet Hosea, who had also been commanded to, quote, take a wife of whoredom as the first symbolic act of his calling. With Chalabi's financial and political backing, a real wife now, and many additional followers, Sabbatai returns to Jerusalem in triumph. Passing through the city of Gaza, which at that time had an important Jewish community, he met Abraham Nathan ben Elisha Chaim Ashkenazi, a well-known eccentric, 18 years younger than him, known as Nathan of Gaza. Nathan had been born in Jerusalem, son of a respectable rabbinical scholar and Kabbalist. He had married the daughter of a wealthy Gaza merchant and gone to live there. And in 1664, he had taken up the intensive study of Lurianic Kabbalah. Nathan would become the man behind the appearance, the mastermind, the chief theorist and impresario of the Sabbatian movement. He was learned, he was brilliant, he was inventive, and he was resourceful. He quickly masters Lurianic techniques of meditation and ecstasy inducement. By early 1665, Nathan was experiencing prolonged visions. But it is significant that he was already modifying Lurianic concepts to suit the particular projection of the Messiah that he was conceiving in his own mind. Nathan was an outstanding example of a highly imaginative and dangerous prototype. He could construct a system of explanations and predictions of phenomena which were both highly plausible and at the same time sufficiently imprecise and flexible to accommodate new and often highly inconvenient events, because Sabbatai was so unpredictable, whenever they occurred. Sabbatai Zevi was in every way Nathan's inferior. He was less intelligent, less learned, and less inventive. By this time, Sabbatai was having manic phases during which he had a tendency to break the law and blaspheme. For example, he pronounced the forbidden name of God. And as Gershom Scholem, the founder of the modern academic study of Kabbalah, points out, Sabbatai probably suffered from manic depressive psychosis. His ups consisted of states of excessive mental exaltation, joyful enthusiasm, and feelings of sublime happiness to the point of ecstasy, and the certainty of inspiration from above. At these moments, Sabbatai saw a new and glorious world, and himself as this reborn creature on top of it. He cogitates the most astounding and original thoughts, and may even have had visions. Then there were, of course, the opposite, his downs, periods of dejection, of melancholia, utter passivity and lack of initiative, agony of mind, and a feeling of being persecuted within himself, and worse, even from without. This is in fact different from most other mental diseases in that it leaves the total personality intact and does not affect the intellectual powers. And however sick or disturbed Sabbatai may have been, there was still this relative consistency in his thoughts and acts. Nathan was clearly able to provide a Kabbalistic interpretation of Sabbatai's manias and depressions, in particular the figure of Job, which was consistently treated by Nathan from the very beginning as the prototype of the personality of the Messiah. So let's imagine these two men together. Sabbatai was a poor leader. He was devoid of willpower. He was without a program of action of where he was going. He was a victim of his illness and of his illusions. But his paradoxical personality inspired Nathan and provided him with the impetus for his actions and his ideas. Nathan was Sabbatai Zevi's PR man. And now we have to sense the beginning of the Sabbatian movement. In 1665, Nathan announces that the Messianic age would begin in 1666 with the conquest of the world without bloodshed. In preparation of that time, the Messiah would lead the 10 lost tribes back to the Holy Land. Finally, all Jews would return to Jerusalem. All Jews, therefore, at this moment, are expected to pack their bags and leave and go to Jerusalem, ready for the Messianic age. The Messianic belief, of course, had been forged by the classical prophets of ancient Israel. In the end of days, they said, God will redeem his people and gather them to the land. There and then, the temple could be rebuilt. And it's interesting because in this respect, Gershom Scholem saw Sabbatai Zevi as the first Zionist, and scholars have asked whether it would have been so bad had Jews come at that moment in history to the Holy Land in their thousands in 1666. But this was all too much for the Jerusalem rabbis. They excommunicate Sabbatai Zevi and Nathan of Gaza. And so Sabbatai and Nathan decide that Jerusalem was not the best place for them to carry out their plans. Sabbatai leaves for his native Smyrna, and Nathan proclaims that henceforth Gaza, rather than Jerusalem, would be the sacred city. Most of the Jews in Gaza and even in Hebron join the camp of believers. Nathan succeeded in explaining to their followers, including, we dare say, to Sabbatai Zevi himself, the mystical significance of the strange and repellent aspects of the Messiah's personality. Others were attracted to Nathan's doctrine that the Messiah's behavior, strange as it might appear, was essentially a tikkun, a healing process of profound mystical significance. Sabbatai leaves Jerusalem in June, arriving in Aleppo on the 8th of Av, on July the 20th, 1665. After stopping in Aleppo for 3 months, Sabbatai arrives back in Smyrna early in September 1665. Nathan had stayed in Gaza. In the same month, Nathan sends out a long letter outlining the Messiah's program. His work, said Nathan, had now superseded the Lurianic system and opened a new phase in history. He had the power to justify all sinners himself. Hence, it was necessary for all Jews to do penance immediately. Meanwhile, Sabbatai Zevi himself moved back to Constantinople, and it was now that the mass hysteria begins to break out. And let's think for a moment how far this hysteria spread. What we do have are letters of Nathan that were written between 1665 and most of 1666. And these, as you can see, were sent to the Jewish communities in Frankfurt, in Prague, in Mantua, in Italy, Constantinople, and Amsterdam. These actually went unanswered, which is a bit of a problem for us as scholars. But what the letters say themselves is fascinating. Nathan of Gaza sends instruction calling for harsh penitence. Jews were to pray, fast several days a week, and some of them even for weeks, for the whole week. They were to immerse themselves under the ice in winter, and there they were to utter prayers that had recently been composed. According to other scholars, they were then to sell all of their possessions and go to the Holy Land in preparation to meet Sabbatai Zevi there. Some believed that they would be transported on clouds. Others bought passages. Abraham Pereira, reputedly the richest Jew in Amsterdam, left with his household for the Holy Land, though his ship got no further than Leghorn. Poems were written, books printed and dated the first year of the renewal of the prophecy and the kingdom. Long, excited letters from Jewish communities even began to confirm certain happenings, but these were often based on rumors. For example, Constantinople wrote to Leghorn, as I write here, recounting wonders that were occurring in Cairo. There were news of miracles in Salonica, which were passed from Rome to Hamburg and then on to Poland. And one such miracle was that the 10 lost tribes, who were variously said to be assembling in Persia or the Sahara Desert and marching on Mecca or Constantinople. However, in Jerusalem, we see a different story, which suggests that Zevi's movement was far less successful there. No letters were sent out from Jerusalem to other communities. The Jerusalem authorities were anxious to hedge their bets. There and elsewhere, skeptical rabbis judged it best to hold their peace. Nathan of Gaza during this time continues to compose Kabbalistic tracts and homilies, unfolding the meaning of his first great vision, and to advise penitent inquirers on the proper ways of perfecting their souls. So let's continue. In Constantinople, the impact of the message was instantaneous and violent. Sabbatai had not been to Constantinople since 1658, but when the prophetic messages and the messianic tidings arrived, the excitement was greater than in Smyrna. Reports sent to Amsterdam stated as early as 1665 that Sabbatai Zevi had confirmed his mission by miracles. He had predicted the sudden death of certain people, as well as a day of darkness and the fall of great hailstones, fire and brimstone. The prophetic enthusiasm spread from Smyrna to other communities in Asia Minor, the Aegean Islands, and Greece. In Constantinople, Sabbatai became the leader of the community and used his power to crush any opposition. He deposed the existing rabbi of Smyrna as well, Aron-Beller, and appointed one of his followers, a rabbi of Turkey, Chaim ben Venisti, in his place. And if we look at this list, we can see that Sabbatai's followers soon included many of the prominent rabbis. And they're listed here for us to really sense who they were and who he was attracting. Meanwhile, more fantastic reports circulated and were widely believed. For example, it was said that in the north of Scotland, a ship had appeared with silken sails and ropes, manned by sailors who spoke Hebrew. The flag bore the inscription, "The 12 Tribes of Israel." The Jewish community of Avignon in France prepared to emigrate to the Holy Land in the spring of 1666. And probably with his consent, Sabbatai's adherents planned to abolish many of the ritualistic observances because, according to a minority opinion in the Talmud, in the Messianic time, there would no longer be holy obligations. For example, the fast on the 10th of Tevet became a day of feasting and rejoicing. Samuel Primo, born in Jerusalem in 1635, and became a firm supporter, and then Sabbatai's secretary in Smyrna, directed the following circular to all of the Jews in the name of the Messiah. And this is what it read: "The first begotten Son of God, Sabbatai Zevi, Messiah and Redeemer of the people of Israel, to all the sons of Israel, peace. Since you have been deemed worthy to behold the great day and the fulfillment of God's word by the prophets, your lament and sorrow must be changed into joy, and your fasting into merriment, for ye shall weep no more. Rejoice with song and melody, and change the day formerly spent in sadness and sorrow into a day of jubilee, because I have appeared." The circular noted Nathan of Gaza's prediction that Sabbatai Zevi would place the Ottoman Sultan's crown on his own head. Samuel Primo's message was considered blasphemous, and there was some outrage and dissension in the communities, while many of the leaders who had been sympathetic to the movement were shocked by such radical innovations. In Constantinople, it became known that Nathan of Gaza had prophesied that Sabbatai would place the Sultan's crown on his own head. And this was one step too far. As a result, the Grand Vizier, Ahmed Pasha, orders Sabbatai's immediate arrest and has him imprisoned, maybe to avoid any doubts as to the power still wielded by the Turkish Sultanate. Meanwhile, Nathan of Gaza and others circulated fabulous reports about the miraculous deeds the Messiah was supposedly performing in the Turkish capital, and the messianic expectations in the Jewish diasporas continued to rise. And thank goodness, really, for Nathan, that there was no internet at the time, and it took a while for people to discover what Sabbatai Zevi had done. But after 2 months' imprisonment in Constantinople, Sabbatai is moved to the state prison castle at Abydos, accompanied by some of his friends. The immense sums sent to him by his rich followers, the charms of the queenly Sarah, his wife, and the cooperation shown by the Turkish officials and others enabled Sabbatai to show off almost royal splendor in the prisons of Abydos. Accounts of his life are exaggerated and spread among Jews in Asia, in Africa, and some parts of Europe, as Jews continue to pack their bags. Now, while Sabbatai was in Abydos prison, another incident occurred which ultimately leads to his downfall. Two prominent Polish Talmudists from Lwów in Poland, who were among his prison visitors, informed Sabbatai that in their native country, a Polish Kabbalist prophet, Nehemiah HaKohen, had himself announced the coming of the Messiah. Sabbatai, terrified, ordered the prophet to appear before him in prison. Nehemiah obeyed, reaching Abydos after a journey of 3 months at the beginning of September in 1666. The meeting did not go well. Nehemiah may have been a Turkish plant or possibly a rival Messiah. He cross-questioned Sabbatai about his claims, found his answer unsatisfactory, and denounced him to the Turks as an impostor. On the 15th of September 1666, Sabbatai Zevi was brought before the council, or divan, in Constantinople in the presence of the Sultan. Zevi denies ever having made messianic claims, and he's then given a choice between converting to Islam or death. And at the urging of the Sultan's doctor, an apostate Jew, Sabbatai takes the turban, assumes the name of Aziz Mehmed Effendi and the title, the keeper of the palace gates, and accepted a government pension of 150 piastres a day. But the biggest problem that now has to be faced was how to explain such an outrageous apostasy to Sabbatai's tens of thousands of followers. Nathan of Gaza has to think of an explanation quickly. And one of his followers then publishes a mystical work claiming he was the true Messiah in spite of his conversion, and that his goal was to bring thousands of Muslims to Judaism. Gradually, the Turks tired of Sabbatai's antics, ending his doorkeeper's salary. At the beginning of 1673, the Sultan exiled Zevi to Ansinche, near Montenegro, where his wife dies in 1674. Zevi then marries Esther, the daughter of Rabbi Yosef HaPhilosoph of Salonika. Shortly afterwards, Sabbatai dies, according to some accounts, on September the 17th, 1676, the high holy day of Yom Kippur. But there is a division among scholars. Some believe he was buried in Asinches, you see here, others in Albania. Upon his death, his widow and brother moved to Salonika. Nathan himself, Nathan of Gaza, dies 4 years later in 1680, but he never converted to Islam. So in the time that we have left, I want us first to look at how the Jews of Salonika reacted during the movement, and then again after news reached them about Sabbatai's conversion. According to Thomas Conan, the Protestant minister who wrote another one of these Christian chronicles, and this one was titled Vain Hopes of the Jews as Revealed in the Figure of Sabbatai Zevi, published in Amsterdam in 1669, believers in Salonika surpassed all other Sabbatians in the fervor of their faith and in the extremes of their penitential activities. Many of them apparently buried themselves up to their neck in soil, remained that way for 3 hours, during which they recited litanies of Sabbatian penitential prayers. They also were convinced that the Messiah would not appear until all souls had entered the bodies destined for them. And we hear accounts, therefore, in Salonika of Jews marrying off their young children so that girls would conceive as soon as possible and therefore hurry up this final redemption. Conan reports that 700 to 800 marriages involving children took place in Salonika at the height of the Sabbatian movement, further disrupting the community, as you can imagine, where many believers were reduced to poverty when their shops and places of business were closed in anticipation of the Messiah's arrival. Many moved to Jerusalem to be there to witness the revelation of the Messiah. So what happens when the news of the conversion of Sabbatai to Islam reaches Salonika? How do our Jews respond? Well, we witness a silence as well as a following, meaning there are those who follow Sabbatai Zevi and convert to Islam. The euphoria in the Jewish world collapsed abruptly as the news got out, though many refused to believe it at first. Rabbis and communal leaders, both those who had accepted the claims and the few who had denied them, closed ranks to impose a total silence of the affair. It was argued that any post-mortem would be to challenge the divine, inscrutable wisdom that allowed the fiasco to happen in the first place. But also, there was a grave concern that the Turks would start a witch hunt against Jewish leaders who acquiesced in what, after all, would have been a revolt against Ottoman rule. Remember, Sabbatai was supposed to make the Sultan his own servant. So every official effort was made to rewrite or unwrite history and pretend that the affair had never happened. And yet again, something different happens in Salonika. Here about 300 Jews convert to Islam and created a sect in order to follow Sabbatai. They called themselves the Ma'aminim, the believers. They created a kind of mystical Islam with a Judaic component not found in mainstream Muslim life. They observed some Jewish observances while pretending to be faithful Muslims and fusing Sufi and Kabbalistic teachings. Others called them Donme, which was a sort of derogatory term which conveyed the suspicion with which others regarded them, apostates or turncoats, and the Jews also regarded them as such. They maintained their own mosque and cemetery and married only among themselves. But why Salonika? Well, the main reason was the presence there of Sabbatai's widow, Aisha. She and her father, the respected Rabbi Yosef Philosophe that I mentioned before, helped establish a sect there. After her return to Salonika, Aisha proclaimed that her younger brother Jacob, known as Querido, or the Beloved, was the reincarnation of her late husband, Sabbatai Zevi. And from the 1680s, these Donme congregated in Salonika and led an independent communal life, intermarrying, doing business together, maintaining their own shrines and handing down their secret traditions. Some of them were quite shocking. At the beginning of the 18th century, most of the Donme knew Hebrew, which was the language of the Sabbatian liturgy. They built themselves a mosque, the Yenmi Mosque in Salonika, a building constructed, as you can see, in this eclectic Moorish European style that is in use today as an exhibition hall by the Salonican municipality. It's part of the Archaeological Museum. As time went on, knowledge of Hebrew decreased as the Donme were cut off from rabbinic training, and the Ladino of their daily speech came to dominate both their profane and their sacred literature. With independence in the 1910s, Greece expelled their Muslims, including the Donme, from its territory. Most migrated to Turkey, where by the mid-20th century they had become highly assimilated. The extreme secrecy of the sect was such that until 1935, only 2 short Donme prayers were known to the outside world. This secrecy was then breached when a Donme family donated a handwritten prayer book to the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Gershom Scholem, who published the text of this prayer book in 1941, writes of its unexpected character, which, he says, was completely Jewish. We were greatly surprised at the time to discover that we were here dealing with purely Jewish prayers. The mystical value of belief for these Sabbatians has replaced the real activity of fulfilling the commandments, which has become for them no longer possible or valid. No parts of these prayers would make the reader ever dream that these worshippers were Muslims. Scholem then gives the full text of the Sabbatian Credo, in which the most interesting parts are those that mention Sabbatai Zevi, and I will read them here. I believe with perfect faith that Sabbatai Zevi is the true King Messiah. I believe with perfect faith that Sabbatai Zevi, may his majesty be exalted, is the true Messiah, and that he will gather the dispersed of Israel from the 4 corners of the earth. May it be pleasing before thee, God of truth, God of Israel, who dwells in the glory of Israel, in the 3 knots of faith, which are one to send us the just Messiah, our Redeemer, Sabbatai Zevi, speedily and in our days. Amen. Just a last thought then, as to why the movement itself had been relatively successful. Why were Jews so interested in believing that Sabbatai Zevi had been the Messiah? Well, it seems that the cause of the Sabbatai movement was indeed a Jewish religious movement, which sprang, of course, from the heart of Judaism, as it existed at this time in early modern Europe. And it combined 2 aspects: a popular and therefore perhaps irrational messianism, the vision of catastrophe and redemption, carrying within itself a certain criticism of rabbinic authority. And this, of course, had been given strength by the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. But the other was this Kabbalistic mysticism and the systemization of the great teachers of the school of Sfat, and in particular everything that Isaac Luria Ashkenazi was teaching, and that Nathan himself, as the main PR man of Sabbatai Zevi, had provided the movement. Lurianic Kabbalah provided a description of how ordinary Jews, by their prayers and piety, could precipitate the Messianic age. Remember too that the silence imposed by the Jewish leaders offered no choice to the people of discussing the affair after 1666. And this, of course, was fundamental to the ability of the Jewish people to reassociate their beliefs and hopes and to eradicate from their minds their firm expectation that the Messianic era was about to come. Thank you, everyone. And in our final class together, we will look particularly at our Jews in Greece in the 20th century.